You are throwing your money away. That is the sentence that haunts every single renter in America. It usually comes from a well-meaning uncle at Thanksgiving or a random comment on social media telling you that you are financially illiterate if you do not own a deed to a property. I am Ben, and I am here to tell you that for the vast majority of people watching this video right now, that advice is not just outdated, it is dangerous. I have spent the last 40 hours buried in a complex spreadsheet calculating the exact mathematical tipping point between renting and buying in the current United States economy, and the answer I found is going to upset a lot of real estate agents. We need to start by acknowledging the massive elephant in the room. The American dream has been packaged and sold to us as a 3-bedroom house with a white picket fence. We are conditioned to believe that renting is just paying someone else's mortgage and that buying is the only path to building real wealth. It feels like a rite of passage. If you are renting, you are in a transitional phase. If you are buying, you have made it. You are an adult. But let's play a quick imagination game to shatter that illusion. I want you to close your eyes and imagine it is 1995. The classic sitcom Friends just premiered. The internet is barely a thing. In this world, the median home price in the United States is around $130,000. A regular family with one decent income could buy a home and still afford to go on vacation. Now snap your fingers and open your eyes. It is today. That same house is now $450,000. Interest rates have likely doubled or tripled depending on the cycle, and wages definitely have not kept up. We are playing a game with rules written 30 years ago, but the board has completely changed. This is why I sat down and built a massive calculator. I wanted to strip away the emotion, the nostalgia, and the pressure from your parents and look strictly at the raw math. I inputted property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance costs, the opportunity cost of your down payment, and inflation. What I discovered is a specific financial threshold that I am calling the $97 rule. It is a simple razor you can use to cut through the noise. There is a huge misconception that when you pay a mortgage, you are paying yourself. You think you are moving money from your checking account into a savings account that happens to be shaped like a house, but that is false. When you analyze the amortization schedule of a standard 30-year fixed mortgage, specifically in the first 7 to 10 years, you realize something terrifying. You are still paying rent. You just aren't paying a landlord. You are renting money from the bank. I looked at data from major U.S. metro areas like Austin, Nashville, and Seattle. In many of these markets, the cost to rent a luxury apartment is currently half the monthly cost of buying the average starter home. Half! Yet people are still scrambling to buy because they are terrified of missing out. They think if they do not buy now, they will be priced out forever. But here's the twist that most financial gurus ignore. While you are stressing about the equity you are missing out on by renting, you are ignoring the massive wealth destruction that happens when you buy a house at the wrong time. I found that in certain scenarios, buying a house today could actually leave you hundreds of thousands of dollars poorer over a 10-year period compared to renting. Later in this video, I am going to walk you through the $97 rule step by step so you can apply it to your specific zip code. It is going to show you exactly when buying becomes a trap and when renting becomes the smartest investment move you can make. But before we get to that number, we have to look at the invisible costs that almost nobody talks about until it is too late. If you are ready to stop guessing and start calculating, go ahead and hit the like button on this video. It helps the algorithm show this to other young people who are feeling guilty about renting. We're about to dissect where your money actually goes when you sign those closing papers, and I promise you it is not all going into your equity. Let's talk about the phantom landlord. This is the concept that breaks most first-time homebuyers because they simply don't see it coming. When you rent, your monthly payment is the maximum you will pay for housing that month. If the dishwasher breaks, you call maintenance. If the roof leaks, you call the landlord. Your rent is a ceiling. But when you buy a house, your mortgage payment is just the floor. It is the minimum you will pay. Most people look at a mortgage calculator online, see a number like $2,500 a month, and think, great, I pay $2,000 in rent right now, so for only $500 more, I can own the place. This is the math that leads to financial ruin. That number on the screen is a lie because it ignores the unrecoverable costs of ownership. These are costs that do not build equity. They do not go into your pocket. They vanish. Let's break down exactly where your money goes in those early years. I want you to picture a bucket. In your mind, you think every mortgage payment is water filling up that bucket, which represents your ownership of the house. But the reality is that for the first several years, your bucket has a massive hole in the bottom. If you take out a $400,000 mortgage at a 7% interest rate, your monthly payment is roughly $2,600. In the very first month, do you know how much of that goes toward the principal loan? How much actually buys the house? About $300. That's it. The other $2,300 is pure interest. It goes straight to the bank. You are essentially paying rent to the bank for the privilege of using their money. But the bank isn't the only hand in your pocket. You also have property taxes. Depending on where you live, this can be another $500 to $1,000 a month that disappears. Then you have homeowners insurance, which is skyrocketing across the U.S. right now. And finally, the silent killer, maintenance. There's a rule of thumb that says you should budget 1% of your home's value per year for maintenance. On a $400,000 house, that's $4,000 a year, or roughly $330 a month. But averages are misleading. Maintenance doesn't happen in neat $300 monthly chunks. It happens when your HVAC system dies in the middle of July and costs $8,000 to replace instantly.
Imagine this scenario. You are a frog sitting in a pot of water. The water feels fine. You just bought your house, you painted the walls, you feel like a responsible adult. Then, month by month, the heat turns up. The water heater rusts out, the fence blows down in a storm, the property tax assessment comes in higher than last year. Slowly, you were being boiled alive by costs you didn't factor into that initial online calculator. I call these unrecoverable costs. If you are renting, your unrecoverable cost is your rent. If you own, your unrecoverable costs are interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. To make a fair comparison, you shouldn't compare your rent to your mortgage payment. You should compare your rent to the unrecoverable costs of owning. This brings us to a shocking realization. In many high-cost cities, the unrecoverable costs of owning a home are actually higher than the cost of renting a similar unit. This means you are literally throwing away more money by owning than by renting. You are paying more in interest, taxes, and maintenance than you would pay a landlord for a roof over your head. And we haven't even touched on the closing costs yet. When you buy, you pay 2 to 5% of the purchase price in fees. When you eventually sell, you pay another 6% in agent fees. That is roughly 10% of the asset's value lost to transaction costs. If you stay in a house for only 3 or 4 years, the appreciation of the home often won't even cover those fees. You could walk away from the sale with a check for $0 or even owing money. So, the phantom landlord is real. He is the bank, the tax assessor, the insurance agent, and the contractor fixing your roof. And unlike a human landlord, you can't negotiate with him, and you can't just move out at the end of the lease without selling the entire asset. But Ben, you might say, what about the appreciation? Homes always go up in value, right? So even if I pay these costs, I'll make it back when I sell. Well, that is the next trap. We need to talk about what else you could have done with that money. We need to talk about the opportunity cost gap, and this is where the spreadsheet numbers get really ugly. Let's run a simulation. Imagine you have $80,000 sitting in your bank account right now. You have scraped and saved for years to get this pile of cash. You are standing at a fork in the road. On the left path, you use that money as a down payment on a house. On the right path, you continue renting and dump that entire $80,000 into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. Here's a quick pop quiz to test your financial intuition. Over the last 100 years, which asset class has actually performed better? Is it residential real estate or is it the stock market? If you answered real estate, you, along with most of America, are wrong. Adjusted for inflation, housing prices have historically grown at barely 1% a year, while the stock market has averaged around 7%. We are obsessed with the idea that houses are these magical wealth-generating machines, but often they are just forced savings accounts with terrible interest rates. This brings us to the opportunity cost gap. This is the what-if scenario that destroys the argument for buying in today's high-interest market. When you hand over your down payment, that money is effectively dead. It is trapped in the drywall and the foundation. It is no longer earning you compound interest in the market. I ran the numbers for a specific scenario in Dallas, Texas, to show you how wide this gap really is. Let's take two friends, Dan and Ben. Dan buys a $450,000 house. He puts 20% down, which is $90,000. His total monthly payment, including taxes and insurance, is around $3,600 a month. Ben, on the other hand, decides to rent a similar house down the street for $2,600 a month. This is a very realistic spread in today's market. Ben takes his $90,000 and puts it into the stock market. But here's the kicker. Because Ben's rent is $1,000 cheaper than Dan's mortgage payment, Ben also invests that extra $1,000 every single month.
Fast forward 10 years. Dan's house has appreciated, sure. He has some equity, but Ben's investment portfolio has been compounding undisturbed. When I looked at the final net worth calculation after a decade, the difference wasn't just a few bucks. It was enough to make you angry. In many models, the renter ends up hundreds of thousands of dollars richer than the homeowner because the stock market growth on that initial cash pile outpaced the appreciation of the home, especially after you factor in all those unrecoverable costs we talked about earlier. Dan is house rich, but cash poor. He can't spend his kitchen cabinets. If he wants to access his money, he has to sell his house or take on debt. Ben, however, has a liquid portfolio that he can access anytime. He has freedom. Dan has a mortgage. Now, I am not saying you should never buy. There is a specific mathematical tipping point where this logic flips and buying becomes the smarter move. It all comes down to one specific number that I found in the data. If you ignore this number, you are gambling with your financial future. I call it the $97 rule, and it is the only formula you need to decide whether to sign a lease or a mortgage deed. So, how do you actually decide? You can't predict the stock market and you can't predict housing appreciation perfectly, but you don't need to. You just need to know the $97 rule. After crunching the numbers for 40 hours, I found that the complexity of most rent versus buy calculators is unnecessary. You can boil it down to a simple razor. Here is the rule. If the monthly unrecoverable costs of the home you want to buy are within $97 of your current rent, you should buy. If the gap is wider than $97, you should rent. Why $97? Because in my data set, that was the margin of error where the long-term equity benefits of owning finally started to outweigh the opportunity cost of investing the cash elsewhere. It's the tipping point. Let's do this together right now. You can do this on a napkin. We're going to replace that complex spreadsheet with a simple subtraction problem. First, calculate the unrecoverable costs of the home you want to buy. Remember, this is not the total mortgage payment. This is the money that disappears. Take the monthly interest portion of the mortgage. You can find this on any amortization calculator online. Add the monthly property taxes, add the monthly homeowner's insurance, add a conservative estimate for monthly maintenance, usually 0.75% to 1% to the home price annually, divided by 12. If there's an HOA fee, add that too. Let's say you do this math on a target house and the total unrecoverable cost is $2,100 a month. Now look at the rent for a comparable place. Not a shoebox apartment, but a place similar to the house you want. Let's say the rent is $2,000 a month. The difference is $100. The unrecoverable cost of owning is $100 more than renting. According to the $97 rule, you rent. Why? Because that gap is too wide. The premium you're paying to the bank and the government just to own the asset is bleeding you dry faster than the equity can build up.
But if the rent was $2,100 and your unrecoverable ownership costs were $2,150, that is a $50 gap. That is within the $97 safe zone. In that case, buy. You are close enough to the break-even point that the forced savings aspect of the principal payment and potential long-term appreciation make it worth it. This rule saves you from the trap of stretching to buy. If your unrecoverable costs are $500 higher than rent, you are making a charitable donation to your bank's profit margin. However, there is one massive exception. This rule has a kryptonite. It completely breaks if you plan to move within 5 years. If you buy a house and sell it 3 years later, the transaction costs, that 6% agent fee and closing costs, will destroy any math I just gave you. The $97 rule assumes you are staying put for at least 7 to 10 years. If you're a 25-year-old constantly changing jobs or cities, do not use this rule. Just rent. The flexibility is worth more than any spreadsheet can calculate. And speaking of flexibility, that leads us to the one variable that money can't measure. We've done the math, but we haven't talked about the psychology. There is a specific trap called the golden handcuffs that keeps homeowners miserable even when they're technically making money. We have covered the math, but we haven't talked about the invisible prison that comes with a 30-year mortgage. This is the one psychological trap that keeps people miserable in big, beautiful houses. It is called the golden handcuffs, and in the current U.S. housing market, these handcuffs are tighter than ever. Let's run a quick scenario I call the 3 a.m. test. Imagine it is 3 in the morning on a freezing Tuesday in February. Suddenly, you hear the sound of rushing water. A pipe is burst in the wall. If you are a renter, you are a customer. You make one angry phone call to the emergency maintenance line, you roll over, and you go back to sleep while someone else deals with the mess. You have outsourced the stress. If you are a homeowner, you are the CEO of that problem. You are the one panic Googling plumbers who charge triple rates for after-hours calls. You are the one tearing out wet drywall. You are the one fighting with the insurance adjuster 2 weeks later. When you buy a house, you are trading your freedom for a set of keys. You are no longer just living in a home. You are managing a small, expensive, crumbling business. This lack of mobility is a massive financial risk for young people that never shows up on a spreadsheet. In your 20s and 30s, your biggest asset is not a house. It is your career mobility. The ability to pick up and move to New York or Chicago or San Francisco for a 50% pay raise is incredibly valuable. But if you own a house, you're stuck. You have friction. You can't just leave. You have to sell the house, pay the fees, prep it for staging, and pray the market hasn't dipped. I've seen so many friends turn down life-changing career opportunities because they were house poor or terrified of selling. A 2024 survey by Bankrate found that nearly half of American homeowners have regrets about their purchase, with maintenance costs and the feeling of being financially locked in topping the list. There is a distinct luxury to renting that we need to stop apologizing for. You are paying for flexibility. You are paying for the option to leave when the neighborhood goes downhill or when your job changes. You are paying for liquidity. Now, to be fair, there is a flip side. If you rent, you are living in someone else's box. You can't knock down a wall to build a nursery. You can't always have a Great Dane. You are subject to the whims of a landlord who might sell the building out underneath you. For some people, that psychological instability is worth paying any price to avoid. If you are planning to put down deep roots, have 3 kids, and stay in the same zip code for 15 years, the golden handcuffs might actually feel like security to you. But you have to be honest with yourself.
Do you want roots or do you want wings? Because you usually can't afford both at the same time. If you value the ability to pivot your life on a dime, the $97 rule helps you justify renting not as a waste of money, but as a strategic purchase of freedom. So we have the math and we have the psychology. It is time to bring this all together into a final verdict. I'm going to give you a quick checklist to use tonight so you can stop stressing and finally make a decision. Let's wrap this up with a verdict you can actually use. You don't need another 40-hour deep dive. You just need to be honest about your timeline and your numbers. Here is your checklist for tonight. First, check the timeline. If you think you might move, change jobs, or get married in the next 5 years, do not buy a house. Period. The transaction costs will eat you alive. Just rent, invest the difference, and enjoy your freedom. Second, if you're staying put for 7+ years, apply the $97 rule. Calculate the unrecoverable costs, interest plus taxes plus insurance plus maintenance. Compare that number to the rent of a similar home. If the cost to own is within $97 of the rent, buying is a green light. If the gap is wider, renting is likely the better financial move. And finally, ignore the peer pressure. We need to hand out a participation trophy to the homeowner who is technically house poor. Just because someone has a mortgage doesn't mean they are wealthy. They might have a net worth of 0 because every dime goes into the drywall. Renting is not failure. Renting is purchasing patience. It is buying time until you find the right deal or the right life stage. I want you to leave this video feeling relieved. Whether you sign a lease or a deed, as long as you're investing the difference and not blowing it on lifestyle creep, you are building wealth. If this breakdown helped you stop panicking about the housing market, hit the like button so the algorithm shares this truth with more people. And if you are currently renting and investing, leave a comment below with the word freedom. I want to see how many of you are playing the long game. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.